American Civil War brought 4 years of brutal fighting and sacrifice. The carnage was the worst our young country had ever seen. Towns laid to waste, civilians left with no homes or with no place to go, armies starving, marching in bare feet, still believing in their cause. 600,000 American combatants died. More than 100,000 of those were lost right here in Central Virginia, in the most fought-over terrain in the Civil War. This is the story of one modern-day organization that has worked tirelessly to preserve these hallowed grounds, bringing to light the stories of those who gave their last full measure for their beliefs, allowing all of us to stand in the footsteps of our history. This is the history of the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust, preserving hallowed ground.
To stand on a Civil War battlefield is to stand on holy ground, for these fields have been consecrated by their blood and by their bravery. And we believe quite strongly that to deface such ground is to dishonor their suffering and their sacrifice. It has been said that poor is the nation which has no heroes, but shameful is the nation which has them and forgets. By preserving the hallowed ground of a Civil War battlefield, we assure that these men will not be forgotten and lost to time, but will be remembered and honored forever for who they were, for what they did, and for what they can teach us.
In the 19th century, the Rappahannock River region, Chancellorsville, the Wilderness, Spotsylvania, the small town of Fredericksburg, the area was rural. After the Civil War, no one ever visualized the type of growth and sprawl that would eventually take place in the late 20th century. 4 major battles took place here. They left an indelible mark on this area and its landscape. This also created a modern-day dilemma. What should be protected and what should be developed? The National Park Service has protected many of the most important sites and has done a tremendous job of interpreting that history to the public. But not all battlefield sites are within designated park boundaries. The National Park Service cannot purchase that land without major congressional action. That's where the Central Virginia Battlefields Trust comes in.
Preservation does not work as a bureaucratic exercise, nor does it work just if it's a national movement. Instead, preservation requires people within the community who care and are willing to act. In the Fredericksburg region, in its quest for preserving Civil War battlefields, the Central Virginia Battlefield Trust has been that force, that voice within this community. There are a lot of things the federal government can't do. In the real estate market, we can't always act as fast as we might want to act. We can't always maybe match the price a buyer wants to pay. But on innumerable occasions over the last 15 years, the Central Virginia Battlefield Trust has stepped in and bought land when we didn't have the time to do it. Or in some cases worked with a landowner who was unwilling to sell to the federal government. The role of the CVBT in the preservation of battlefield lands in this region is in itself historic.
I remember very well back in 1995 when we first got going with the CVBT. We were just a small group locally here in Fredericksburg, and I remember distinctly that it was over lunch one day. I was having lunch with the superintendent of the Park Service here, and we were talking about all the problems that the Park Service had in Spotsylvania County in particular, where there was a constant role of development in this area. And whenever somebody would want to come along and develop a piece of property in Spotsylvania that was on a battlefield that was important historic ground, the Park Service would come and talk to the Board of Supervisors and try to make them realize the importance of preserving a particular piece of land. And what would happen is that the Board of Supervisors and the public would pounce on the Park Service and accuse them of being bad neighbors, and why should they do anything to help the Park Service. And those of us who lived here and who appreciated these battlefields and how they were rapidly disappearing, we said, what's going on here? Why should the Park Service be placed in the position of defending what is actually our history? It's not the Park Service's, it's not the federal government's history, it's ours. And so we sat there and said, something needs to be done here, that the Park Service needs an ally. They need help, particularly on protecting land that was not within the authorized boundaries of the Park Service. And so half a dozen of us got together and decided we wanted to form a historic lands trust. And we held a little meeting, we got people together, and we envisioned this primarily as a local group. We never realized that eventually it would become national in scope and have 800 or so members.
CVBT's first action was to assist the National Park Service in acquiring Willis Hill, above the sunken road in the center of the Fredericksburg battlefield. From this site, soldiers of the Washington Artillery of New Orleans had a breathtaking and deadly view of Fredericksburg and the open plain west of town.
When Willis Hill came on the market, the sisters were asking a certain price, and the National Park Service was about $230,000 under the purchase price that the sisters wanted for the property. So therefore it became a question of how to get the difference, the $230,000. And CVBT got involved in talking to the sisters about it, and as a result of that, we had, Johnny Mitchell and I met with the representative from the sisters. He came from New York, and we went to lunch up the street here at Scheherazade Restaurant, I believe it was. And we got talking to the gentleman, and he explained to us what the sisters wanted. And we told him, well, we have about $230,000 short. So while we were sitting there and discussing that, Johnny Mitchell, and I were the two representing the CVBT at the time, Johnny Mitchell popped up and says, oh, we'll pay the $230,000. And the gentleman was very appreciative of that, because he indicated that the sisters really did want to sell the property to preserve it for its historical significance. And so we had a very nice congenial lunch, and after lunch we left, and he went his way, and Johnny and I left, and we started walking down the street, and I turned to Johnny Mitchell and I said, Johnny, do you realize what you've just done? He said, yeah. I said, where in the world are we going to get $230,000? We only had about $10,000, I think, in our bank account at the time. And without batting an eye, Johnny turned back and says, oh, don't worry about it, we'll raise it. And I said, well, I don't have that much in my bank account, and so I don't know what we're going to do. But in any event, he was exactly right, because we went to the Civil War Trust, I believe it was, and they came up with the necessary funds that we did not have in order to reach the $230,000 mark, and as a result, we purchased the Willis Hill.
That first foray into protecting hallowed ground was inside the boundaries of the Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania National Military Park. While CVBT is always willing to help the National Park Service with such acquisitions, the initial board also had a keen interest in hallowed but threatened grounds outside park boundaries. That initial board knew that time, money, dedicated people, and hard work would be needed to protect the battlefields from suburban sprawl.
CVBT was incorporated on the 4th of November 1996, and we had our first formal board meeting a month later on the 3rd of December 1996. The original board was comprised of 7 local folks, who had been witnessing the accelerating destruction of our Civil War battlefields in this area, who understood what was being lost by that destruction, and who decided to stand up and do something about it. None of us were professional historians. None of us had any idea what we were getting into, but all of us were willing to work hard and to use whatever time and talent and treasure we had to save this land. The 7 original board members were Enos Richardson, who was president, Jim Pates, who was vice president, Eric Nelson, who was secretary, I was treasurer, Johnny Mitchell, Ann Rowe, and Baldwin Harrington. Now, all of us came with differing backgrounds, but all of us had one motivation in getting together and forming CVBT, and that motivation is reflected in the Bible. It's Genesis chapter 4, verse 10. What hast thou done? The voice of thy brother's blood crieth unto me from the ground. With some paraphrasing and with deep apologies to the writers of Genesis, it was the men who fought and fell on these fields who motivated us and sustained our passion. In a very real sense, we were called to do this. We heard their voices across time, men who were dead for over a century, who nonetheless looked to us, the living, to protect their memories and their stories, to protect that for which they had made the ultimate sacrifice. And the question was simply put, what would these men have wanted of us? To the 7 of us on the original board, the answer was obvious. These men who fought and fell on these fields would have wanted and would have expected their sacrifice and suffering to be honored and defended, acknowledged and respected. Never forget nor dishonor would have been their counsel and their prayer. To stand on a Civil War battlefield is to stand on holy ground, for these fields have been consecrated by their blood and by their bravery. And we 7 original board members believed quite strongly that to deface that ground dishonored their memory and the meaning of their sacrifice. We simply had to do what we could to prevent that from happening.
With a dedicated, talented, and all-volunteer board of directors, CVBT increased their efforts. After the purchase of Willis Hill in 1996, CVBT acquired 2 historically significant parcels in 1997. The first was 5 acres of Confederate General Stonewall Jackson's famed flank attack in the Chancellorsville battlefield near modern Route 3. This parcel marks the point where Jackson struck the Union flank on May 2, 1863, routing General Howard's 11th Corps. Also saved was a dramatic 99-acre parcel known as McLaw's Wedge on the eastern side of the Chancellorsville battlefield. On May 2, 1863, Confederates commanded by General Lafayette McLaws skirmished across these fields, then covered by forests. McLaw's men pinned Major General Winfield Scott Hancock's division to its works. This holding action gave Stonewall Jackson time to march around the Union Army's right flank and overrun it.
This is a beautiful piece of land that I'm sitting on right now that was part of the May 2nd, 1863 battlefield at Chancellorsville. Along the road here, which is now Route 3, it was a key part of the battlefield and is also part of the front line of development in this area today. Because of the nature of this battlefield, that a lot of the Park Service holdings are separate. It's not one contiguous battlefield. Because of that, there's all this infill development that has been going on. So we have felt the need to concentrate a lot of our preservation efforts on these gaps or spaces in the battlefield. We acquired a small piece right behind me that adjoins the Park Service, which is right where Stonewall Jackson broke through on the flank attack. We've purchased another piece right here across the road and 4 other parcels further east toward Fredericksburg. In doing this, we're able to preserve the viewscape along Route 3 and to protect the integrity of the park. One of these parcels was a 100-acre tract that we call the McLaw's Wedge, which was an important part of the May 1, 1863 battlefield. In that case, this was property that was actually within the Park Service's authorized boundary, but our role was to come in and be able to negotiate a deal that met the seller's price that the Park Service wasn't able to pay. And we then turned around and conveyed it to the Park Service at a loss, and that was our contribution to preserving that site.
Those early successes brought positive press coverage to the fledgling CVBT organization. Public attitudes toward battlefield preservation became more favorable, and CVBT gained momentum. In 1999, 2 more opportunities presented themselves.
In September of 1999, we closed on the Tally Farm, a 25-acre parcel south of Route 3, which was the historic Orange Turnpike, with a price tag of $190,000. Due to the generosity of our members and other donors, that debt was paid off in full by December of 2000. The Park Service and CVBT had previously saved land north of Route 3, but the Tally Farm was our first preservation success south of the road and outside of the Park Service boundaries. The 9-mile run purchase was actually 2 parcels of land. There was a 5-acre parcel saved in 1999 for $45,000. It has trenches and empty grave sites on it. And the other was a 6.5-acre parcel saved in 2002 for $92,000. These parcels are contiguous. They're just east of Chancellorsville and north of Route 3. And they were saved as part of an effort to acquire unprotected land around the critically important crossroads at Chancellorsville. To save a Civil War battlefield requires time and effort, patience and persistence, and money. It requires members and other donors willing to be faithful and financially generous. And in that, CVBT has been blessed beyond measure over the years. Our members have been financially supportive, and because of their generosity, hundreds of acres of hallowed ground on all 4 of our major battlefields, ground well watered with the blood of heroes, has been saved forever. To those of our members who are watching this film, well done and thank you. There are 3 major contributions that have been made over the years that need to be acknowledged as well. Major bequests by Ralph Happel and Brian Pohanka, and a major contribution by Mr. Hugh Cosner. So to Mr. Cosner and to the families of Mr. Happel and Brian, thank you very much. And finally, we've developed an effective working relationship with local officials, developers, and fellow preservation organizations. Our philosophy is to enter every relationship with honesty and integrity, to always keep our word, and to always be known for what we stand for and not for what we stand against. And this approach has paid off. We've been granted preferential tax treatment on real estate holdings in both Spotsylvania and Orange County. We've received donations from developers at Grants Knoll, Latimer's Knoll, Deep Run, and Pelham's Crossing, and we've established an effective working relationship with the Civil War Trust, blending our strengths together toward the common goal of battlefield preservation.
Through the years, CVBT continued to work tirelessly on preserving endangered hallowed ground. Always looking toward a win-win outcome, the group succeeded in saving hundreds of acres, land that otherwise would have been lost to development. Some of these successes were on the Po River, 40 acres, where Union General Grant ordered Major General Winfield Scott Hancock to cross the Po River with his 2nd Corps and threaten the Confederate left flank during the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. Pelham's Crossing, 11 acres. This site was an entrenched position along the Richmond Stage Road, also known as the Bowling Green Road. The earthworks were part of the extensive Confederate defenses established along the Rappahannock River during the winter and spring of 1862-63. The name Pelham's Crossing is the residential subdivision that surrounds this preserved ground. Tally Farm Ridge, 16 acres. On May 2, 1863, approximately 3 miles west of a crossroads called Chancellorsville, Stonewall Jackson launched his daring attack against Federal troops of the Union 11th Corps. Latimer's Knoll, 104 acres. This very dramatic terrain accommodated a battery of guns under Major Joseph W. Latimer. From this vantage point during the Battle of Fredericksburg, the Confederate gunners fired on the columns of Brigadier General John Gibbon's Federal Division as they charged across a farm that would come to be called the Slaughter Pen. Sometimes, on a very rare occasion, it's a structure that is in peril.
An 18-acre parcel with a historic antebellum house, Brayhead, just off Lee Drive, just inside the city limits of Fredericksburg and adjacent to Park Service property, was placed on the market in 2006 by a descendant of the original owners. We simply couldn't run the risk of this land being developed, and so CVBT stepped up and placed a contract on the property. Once that contract was in place, we worked with the owner to place a conservation easement on the acreage and dwelling. And once that was done, we sold the house and grounds, transferring the contents to the current owners, who are restoring the house in accordance with the provisions of the easement. Our total cost was $150,000 and any number of gray hairs. Selling a house is a nerve-wracking experience, I can assure you. But it was worth it to save 18 acres of hallowed ground and one very historic house. And there was one other thing saved with this deal. In the yard of Brayhead, there's a witness tree, a tree that was there at the time of the battle. It's a walnut tree, and tradition has it that General Lee tied Traveler to that tree as he went in to have breakfast on the day of the Battle of Fredericksburg. And that tree is still there, and to be able to stand near it is a very cool thing.
CVBT was proud to have been a key player in a partnership that recently helped save the most expensive parcel of hallowed ground preserved to date, Fredericksburg Slaughter Pen Farm, so named for the carnage that occurred there on December 13, 1862. Slaughter Pen Farm is where the Battle of Fredericksburg was actually both won and lost. That historically critical ground was nearly lost to development.
In regard to Slaughter Pen Farm, CVBT had pursued saving this land years before CVBT even existed. Enos Richardson and Johnny Mitchell would make regular visits to Mr. Pearson, who was the elderly farmer who owned the property. And there's a story that Johnny tells that, while it may be apocryphal, is too bittersweet not to share. As Johnny tells it, after one of his visits with him, Mr. Pearson had finally agreed to sell his farm for $2 million. The deal fell apart later, however, when Mr. Pearson called Johnny and told him that he was having misgivings about the sale because he was worried about the future of his barn cats. Many years later, and with $10 million added to the cost, the land was saved for $12 million through the combined efforts of the Civil War Trust, a local developer, Tricord Homes, and CVBT. The fate of Mr. Pearson's barn cats is unknown. Our pledge of $1 million was huge for a small organization like ours, but we felt that the property was that important and that we wanted to send a clear message to the Civil War Trust that we stood firm in our commitment that this tract should not be lost. I believe that our willingness to step up with this immediate and huge support was key in Civil War Trust's ultimate decision to acquire the property.
The proposed construction of a Walmart supercenter at the intersection of Route 3 and 20 in Orange County was in the national press for most of 2009 and 2010. This area is part of the wilderness battlefield adjacent to the NPS and CVBT-owned battlefield property. Other large land preservation organizations, as well as a battlefield friends group and some local citizens, went to court and by early 2011 convinced Walmart to relocate. CVBT went to work on this situation in another manner. In August of 2009, the CVBT signed a contract to purchase 93 acres on the opposite corner from the proposed Walmart. This site became known as Wilderness Crossroads. At a cost of $950,000, the newly christened Wilderness Crossroads served notice that CVBT and the preservation community at large was serious about protecting this area of the wilderness battlefield. Dr. Stevens explains the creative financing used to pay for this property.
We closed on the 93-acre Wilderness Crossroads property in August of 2009. With the imminent threat of the Super Walmart being built near the property, we moved quickly to secure it, knowing that this property marks the true gateway of the wilderness battlefield. The Germanna Plank Road traversed the property, with a part of the original roadbed still visible and walkable today. How cool is that? The cost was $950,000. We were able to put together a funding package, including both state and federal matching grants, totaling almost $650,000. And the Civil War Trust contributed $94,000 more. Notwithstanding our small size, such innovative financing is indicative of CVBT's sophistication and ability to leverage our members' donations.
The CVBT has a proven track record. They have protected over 900 acres of historic dirt and grass. But what are the long-range plans for these preserved parcels?
What we are trying to do as an organization, as a Historic Lands Trust, is to use whatever tools we have available to save land. We are very lucky in this area that we have a tremendous partner in the Park Service. Sometimes we're able to acquire land in lieu of the Park Service, acquire it, then convey it to the Park Service. In other cases, we acquire easements that are permanent, that people are able to get tax credits for, and there's an incentive for them to grant us an easement. In other cases, we partner with other organizations, such as the Civil War Trust, where together we're able to save a piece of land. In other cases, we take up the battle through land use. A lot can be preserved through cooperation with local governments and other organizations.
2011 brings CVBT to its 15th anniversary, with over 900 acres of hallowed ground preserved in part or in whole, and more sites to come. What will be next?
It's hard to believe that this organization is 15 years old already. From starting out from scratch with just a handful of people, that we've been able to do so much in this period of time, to the point now where we've saved over 900 acres of battlefield lands in this area. I think the key to our success all along has been a sort of a three-way partnership. Our local volunteers here with the Park Service and the hundreds of people and thousands of donors that we've had all over the country. It's that combination of effort that has led to our success, and I think leaves us poised for much greater things in the future.
We will continue to be a strong advocate for battlefield preservation, prepared to purchase and preserve hallowed ground whenever it becomes available. We will continue to uphold our reputation for honesty and integrity. We will continue to work with others in a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. We will continue to keep our original focus on why we do what we do, why what we do is so vitally important. And that focus, of course, being the desire to continue to prove ourselves worthy of the men who fought and fell on these fields, men whose blood and bravery have forever mixed with the soil, staining it with honor and with everlasting significance. And finally, we will continue to encourage others to join with us in our efforts. When I give speeches to various places, people will come up and they'll say they think that CVBT is doing a terrific job, but they themselves can't get involved. I don't have the time, maybe later. Or I'm not articulate, or I don't know enough, maybe later. Or I don't have a lot of money, maybe later. Well, the problem is the battlefields may not be here later. They're being destroyed right now. And right now is the time to get up and get involved. There's a simple stewardship poem that says it all. I am only one, but I am one. I can't do everything, but I can do something. What I can do, I ought to do. And what I ought to do, by the grace of God, I will do. It's the greatest of all mistakes to do nothing because you think you can do only a little. Do what you can. You may think that one person, when 1,000 are needed to make effective changes, is not enough. But you are incorrect. One committed person can attract 1,000 others, and it's important for each of you to be that one person. Each of you has something to contribute to the future success of CVBT, and there will be meaningful and lasting consequences of your getting involved. Together, we can continue to make a difference. In sum, I think the future is bright for CVBT. Those of us in the leadership of the organization will continue to fight the good fight until our final roll is called. That is our pledge and our promise. By preserving the hallowed ground of a Civil War battlefield, we don't just preserve land, we also preserve the memories and the meaning, the sacrifices and the stories of the men who fought and fell there, men whose bond to cause and comrade and country was so strong that they were willing to die rather than to deny it.